You have studied so many corporate crises. Where does this one fall? I mean, judging by the stock price, it looks pretty severe. How would you characterize it?
I think it's a dramatic overreaction in the market and a gross distortion. When you called it a bombshell investigation, it's a bombshell, all right, but there's no investigation. It's the stapling together of the plaintiff bar's half-truths woven together in a very misleading tapestry that really doesn't tell the story. As you know, I've been, harshly critical of anybody from Tesla to Dennis Kozlowski and the earliest days of Enron to the earliest days. You name the scandal, Theranos. I never mince words. I have no relationship with Johnson & Johnson. Sadly, they've never offered me a dollar for anything. They don't even appear at my events, and yet they are really being badly treated here. This is
what is so unfair?
What's so unfair is a mischaracterization of the research. There's no research that's linking talc to either ovarian cancer or mesothelioma, as the plaintiff bar has tried to weave together. Any case where there's been a jury verdict against the company, they've had it overturned on appeal. There's one case, there's newer one from this summer, and now that one's under appeal. The article, the Reuters article, talks about a very sad situation of a victim dying of such cancer, and yet she had a form of asbestos that was linked to her cancer that has no relationship whatsoever with talc, and even her own can of Johnson & Johnson baby powder shows no asbestos in it. The company has voluminous research from scores of universities and government agencies showing there is no leak. There's no link, rather. But what they do put in there is stuff from a half a century ago of some internal ruminations where company was asking diligently, do we want to make sure there's no connections here? What they don't put in the article is that they went off and researched and found out, in fact, they could critique any such research. There is no problem here. So, and they can validate, certainly for the last 15 years, this is a very safe product. Ironically, the period of time that they are drawing on some of these internal memos is it was the period of time where Jim Burke of Johnson & Johnson was the CEO, who is probably not only the country vicar of good governance, but he actually set the high watermark. Of course, we know in the Tylenol recall at that time with a product tampering challenge. I don't know if you want to get into the details of it, but basically he stood for the paragon of institutional trust, the pillar of integrity, public health being as a public health company, but knew that this is the most valuable source of resource that any company has is institutional trust. And of all companies to attack, this company, I think that it's a gross miscarriage. The lesson here is, what does management do in response to when you get in this era of fast-moving social media? Yes.
Well, they are responding and doing so forcefully. This weekend, of course, they released a long sort of response to the Reuters story. Although, to be fair, there is also the New York Times story that came out December 14th as well. Here's part of it, by the way, talking about the safety of the baby powder, talking about the thousands of women who have been in, tens of thousands of women have been various studies in terms of the safety of talc and their sources and the processing of the talc for regulators, Jeff. They have at least gone about trying to combat them this weekend. But, the New York Times also says executives at J&J for many years were worried about its quality control of talc. That they had raised red flags and the like. I agree with you. There is always certainly the imprint to a certain extent of the plaintiff's bar here.
There's
they did get that $4.8 billion or $4.6 billion judgment last July. But again, you're talking about the 70s and Burke. I'll take you back to Weldon not that many years ago and all the manufacturing issues that J&J had. Those are pretty serious.
I completely agree with you. And you asked us to Jim Cramer in the last hour whether or not that has in any way diluted their reputation from the Jim Burke era. And I must tell you, I agree with you on that one, David. I think Bill Weldon did them no great service for enhancing the reputation that they had. But they have had I think, a great comeback from that period of missteps. And I think Alex Gorski has done a terrific job. I wish they'd come out even earlier with the CEO and chief medical officer the way the legendary Jim Burke and his team did. And I'm glad that Alex Gorski's going on with Jim Cramer tonight. But you mentioned those other studies, even that the Times is focused on it, and not to diminish the integrity of the Times either. But again, it's half the story. It's going back half a century. where people clumsily use the language about all fibrous materials as all fibrous materials were in fact asbestos, which they weren't. There are some very innocuous materials that look similar in these mines and don't have the same properties. But furthermore, the purification in the cosmetic talc is very different than the questions they were asking about other commercial talcs out there that for industrial uses.